enter into understanding how the most basic market, which is also called perfect competition. Before we go into perfect competition, it's important to understand and to bring together the demand analysis that we have already done by consumer behavior. We have also taken a look at the producer behavior and the supply curve. Let's bring both of them together first and talk about markets as a whole on the basis of only demand and supply. So once we talk about markets as a whole only on the basis of demand and supply, only after that will we go into the categorization of markets. That is perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition. So we will be going into the sub-categorization of markets only after we understand what are markets. Okay? So before going into the market categorizations, first we are going to talk about consumer surplus, producer surplus from the demand curve and the supply curve respectively, and then go into understanding the supply and demand and finding out the equilibrium quantity and price. Okay? So first part of the session for today, I will be concentrating on these aspects. So let's go into allocation of resources, talking about consumer surplus first. Okay, so let's talk about consumer surplus first. Okay, so let's start by thinking about consumer surplus by thinking that whenever you study economics, you normally purchase a textbook. Now you go to a bookstore and you want to buy a textbook. Your maximum willingness to pay for the textbook was say 800, but you get the book at a discount at say only 600. You feel elated. Why do you feel elated? Because your maximum willingness to pay was 800 and you got the book for only 600. So you have something called a consumer surplus. It's a consumer profit in your head of 200 rupees. Okay. The difference between what you were willing to pay and what you actually paid is what we call this consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is the difference between a buyer's willingness to pay for a good and the amount that they actually pay. Okay. It reflects the extra benefit or satisfaction the consumers get from paying less than what they were ultimately willing to pay. Okay. So this is another example, willingness to pay and the price. Okay. So this is an example where I have basically made what is the maximum willing to pay price, and depending on the different levels of prices, who is going to buy. Okay. So I have made this, right? So the consumer surplus is willingness to pay minus the price. Okay. So there is a consumer surplus that is calculated for each consumer. Usually when we have a market with lots of buyers, we have a smooth demand curve. And once I get the price, the triangle above would give me the consumer surplus. Okay. And the area of a triangle is half into base into height. You just have to apply that and you get the consumer surplus there. So let's now think of a more Indian example. So every now and then you have an Amazon's great Indian festival sale. Okay. Many of us actually hold back the purchases until the discounts kick in, including me. Okay. So supposing you are planning to buy a smartphone. Any of you planning to buy a smartphone? in the recent time, type S in the chat box. So if you're planning to buy a smartphone, you will wait for the festival sale, and supposing your willingness to pay for the phone was say 25,000, and in the sale the price goes down to 22,000, 3,000 is your consumer surplus. Very simple, right? So Suman, Deepak, Ranjobati, okay, you are wanting to buy a smartphone, so all the best. The festival sale is around the corner, so all the best for that. Okay, so that's again a very Indianized example. Okay, so basically, what we get to see is the following. This is my consumer surplus, the blue triangle, which is half into the quantity purchased into the maximum willingness to pay price minus the actual price. Okay. How a higher price reduces consumer surplus because I now have a smaller triangle. Okay. So this blue shaded area is the region with which the consumer surplus is decreasing. Okay. So Q is equal to 10. I get P is equal to 30. This is my consumer surplus. Price falls down to 20. Quantity increases to 20. Now, what is the consumer surplus? Now the consumer surplus increases. Okay. So consumer surplus application in the Indian economy. Let's end the understanding of consumer surplus with that. So in the Indian context, area where I can think about where consumer surplus has impacted economic policy. Um, the government has implemented something called subsidies on the LPG cylinders that has made many households benefit because now they pay less than what they would be willing to pay, right? So the consumer surplus has increased in that case. And many more people who would not be able to afford the LPG cylinder now are able to afford it because of the subsidy. Okay, so a new market has also increased, the quantity has also increased, and more households are now able to have LPG cylinders in their houses. Similarly, discounts on public transportation, such as the metro fares in Delhi, discounts on female, travelers in Karnataka. So all of these increase the consumer surplus by making travel more affordable. That's again an example of an increase in consumer surplus in the Indian economy in the recent times. Um, Another example for consumer surplus would be the entry of the telecom giant Jio in the market. So when Jio launched the services, it initially offered free calls and free data. Okay. Many consumers who were earlier paying much more for the mobile services actually switched over to Geo, and uh, there was a huge surge in the consumer surplus. Now it's practically wiped out, but for a good 2 years there was huge consumer surplus only and only because of Geo being there in the market. This price drop also encouraged people who couldn't afford expensive telecom services to join the network, increasing the overall welfare in the market. Okay. So these are a few instances where the consumer surplus has actually benefited the society and the consumers. So, summarizing this part, the benefit that the consumers get when they pay less than what they were willing to pay is my consumer surplus. In the graphical representation, we already saw that the triangle between the maximum willingness to pay and the price multiplied by the quantity, that triangle itself is my consumer surplus that you can see. Okay. Um, Indian examples where the consumer surplus has seen a surge is Jio, is the Great Indian, Amazon sale, or the Flipkart sales. Okay. So these are a few examples. Importance: higher consumer surplus improves overall economic welfare by making the goods and the services more accessible to more crowd. So I hope this is all now understandable. So now that you have understood consumer surplus, before we move on to the next section, that is producer surplus, we'll do a few questions on consumer surplus. Okay. In the next part, we'll understand how the producers also benefit from market transactions and how both the surpluses together determine the overall efficiency in the market. Okay. Producer surplus is the extra benefit or profit that the producers get when they sell a good or serve at a price higher than their minimum willingness to sell. The minimum willingness to sell is their production cost. Okay. So the producers are actually willing to sell a good if the price covers their production cost. Okay. And any price higher than the production cost is the surplus. The producer surplus is nothing but the profit that the producer is making on selling a good. Okay. If they sell at a higher price than their cost, difference becomes the producer surplus. Okay. So name Jack, Janet, Chrissy, cost for each of them is 10, 20, 35. Cost of three sellers in the lawn cutting business. These are the three costs. Okay. Derive the supply curve from price 0 to 9. No one is going to sell. 10 to 19, only Jack will sell. 20 to 34, Jack and Janet both will sell. And 35 and up, all the three will sell. Okay. So 2 and then 3, all of them will sell. Now, price 0 to 10, no one is going to sell. Between 10 to 19, one person, 20 to 34, two people will sell. 20 to 34, and then 35 onwards, three people will sell. Okay, so this is the supply curve if there are only three sellers. Okay, 20 to 34, this is the part where only two people are selling. 35 and up, three people are selling. So at each quantity, the height of the supply curve is the cost of the marginal seller, the seller who would leave the market if the price were any lower. How many of you want to have this PPT on the student portal and want to refer it at a later time? Type PPT in the chat box. Only if you want it, will I provide it in the student portal. It's not there on the student portal. We will put it under the theory and notes section of perfect competition and markets. If you want it, if you don't, then it's okay. Okay, so this is Jack's cost, this is Janet's cost, this is Chrissy's cost. Producer surplus is price minus the cost. Amount a seller is paid for a good minus the seller's cost of providing it. Price received minus the willingness to sell. So suppose P is equal to 25. Jack's producer surplus is 15. Janet is 5. Chrissy's producer surplus is 0. Total producer surplus is 20. Total producer surplus equals the area above the supply curve under the price 0 to Q. Now, if there are a lot of sellers, I get a smooth supply curve, linear like this. Okay. Again, price is equal to 40. The triangle that is formed gives me the producer surplus. Okay. Height of the triangle is 40 minus 15. That's equal to 25. And the base is 25. So the producer surplus half into 25 into 25. That's 1250. No, that's 312.5. Yeah. Lower price will reduce producer surplus, obviously. The smaller yellow triangle that you get. Two reasons is a few sellers are going out of the market, like in the case of a buyer, a few buyers were going out in the market with an increase in the price. With a reduction in the price, a few sellers will go out of the market, and the sellers who are there in the market, they are now making less profit. So fall due to remaining sellers getting lower price. So find marginal seller's cost at Q is equal to 10. Q is equal to 10. It's 20. Producer surplus is this half into 10 into 20. P rises to 30. Producer surplus on additional units is this small blue triangle, sky blue triangle, which is half into 5 into 10, which is 25. And the existing sellers are also getting a higher profit. That's this rectangle, which is green. So this green and this blue is the total increase in the producer surplus. Okay. So that's about producer surplus. Real life example in India. Let's talk about a real life example in India. Um, Imagine a farmer in Maharashtra growing mangoes. Okay. Um, Maharashtra mangoes, which is Alfonso, is extremely famous. Suppose the minimum price at which he is willing to sell his mango is 50 rupees, which covers his cost and also provides some profit. But due to high demand, he manages to sell it at 80 rupees a kg. So the producer surplus is the selling price minus the minimum willingness to sell price. That's 80 minus 50, that's 30. Okay. Um, let's brainstorm now. Let's think of producer surplus in the locality around you. Okay. Think of examples in your locality where sellers are able to earn higher profits than their minimum cost. Okay. Can anyone share a few examples? You can put it in the chat box. Like something that comes in my mind is, let me get you started. Currently, we are in a festival time in India. In festival times, usually tourism peaks, right? And travel agents have a good time. So travel agents have a good producer surplus during festival and peak tourism times. Okay, that's an example. Um, an example in these times would also be the hotel prices increasing and the owners of the hotels actually making a lot of profit. Airlines, vegetable shop, electronics. Okay. You can also think about cabs, like surge pricing in Ola and Uber, right? The surge pricing in the rush hour leads to a higher producer surplus to all the parties involved, Ola, Uber, and the driver. The fare sometimes actually doubles, and the drivers earn much more than the usual fares. This extra income during the peak rush hours represent an increase in the producer surplus. Another relevant example can be um, the minimum support price of the government of India. So the government announces an MSP for crops like wheat and rice farmers know that they can actually sell their crops above the cost, giving them the confidence and increasing their producer surplus. Okay. While these higher prices increase the producer surplus, can it always be good for the society? No, it cannot, right? For example, think about the times when the vegetable prices soar during the shortages. What happens to us consumers? Obviously, the consumer surplus goes down. Producer surplus, just like the consumer surplus, contributes to the overall economic efficiency of a market. So, together, the consumer and the producer surplus gives us a good understanding of the working and the efficiency of a market. Okay. And together, they reflect the total benefit that the society gets from trade. So, very quick recap on producer surplus. Producer surplus is the extra benefit that the producers get when selling at a higher price than their cost. The area above the supply curve till the price, that is the triangle, that gives me the producer surplus. Indian examples of producer surplus I have shared: MSP pricing, surge price in Ola, Uber, MSP for crops, okay, tourism industry, so on and so forth. So now that we have understood both consumer surplus and the producer surplus, now would you like to see a few questions on producer surplus? If you would, type Q in the chat box. And then after that, we will be ready to explore market efficiency. Okay. We'll see how these surpluses work together to create an efficient market and what happens when the market fails. Okay. Now we'll talk about market efficiency. The market overall welfare is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Okay, so the total surplus is value to buyers minus the cost to sellers. Okay, that is the total surplus of market efficiency. So the allocation of resources, what allocation of resources is actually desirable? That is where the market comes into play. Okay, efficient allocation of resources would be a good intersection of the demand and supply curves. So I have the demand, I have the supply, and the market equilibrium or the most efficient outcome is price is equal to 30 and Q is equal to 15 in this example. I have also labeled the consumer surplus and the producer surplus here. So is the market equilibrium efficient then? Which buyers will consume the good? This, where the willingness to pay is greater than equal to 30. Every buyer whose willingness to pay is less than 30 will not buy the good. The buyers who value the good the most highly are the ones who will consume it. What about the seller? Anyone whose cost is greater than 30 will not sell in the market. The ones whose cost is less than equal to 30 will sell in the market. Okay. The seller with the lowest cost will be producing the good. So does equilibrium quantity maximize the total surplus? Take a look at some other quantity. Value to the consumers of the marginal unit is only 20. Hence can increase the total surplus by reducing quantity. Right? Similarly, when the quantity is lower, again, I'll get a lower value. Okay. So the maximum value of efficiency or the maximum surplus in the economy can only occur at the point where the demand and supply are intersecting. So Adam Smith actually mentioned this in his book, The Wealth of Nations, that man has almost constant occasion for the help of his brethren, and it is in vain for him to expect it from their benevolence only. This is actual passage from the book. Okay. So this is where he says that the invisible hand, that is the market forces, will lead to the most efficient outcome. Okay. He intends only his own gain, and he is, in this as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. So it's not the intention. Every man is wanting his own gain, and that leads to efficiency. Adam Smith's invisible hand basically takes all the information about the buyers and sellers into account, guides everyone in the market to the best outcome and economic efficiency. Free market is the best way to organize economic activity. Okay. So that's about market efficiency. So, all in all, if I go back to what is market efficiency refers to a situation where the resources in the economy are allocated in a way that maximizes the total surplus, which is the sum of the consumer and the producer surplus. An efficient market ensures the right quantity of good is produced. Goods go to those who value them the most, and goods are produced by the most efficient of producers. Okay. So we have also seen the consumer surplus and the producer surplus in this kind of a market equilibrium. The sum of these two areas is what we call the total surplus. And this total surplus, as we have already seen, is maximized at the equilibrium. Okay. So equilibrium in this market is like a balancing point. If the price is too high or too low, the market won't function efficiently. Here's why. As we saw, when the price is too high, there will be excess supply. Producers want to sell more, but the consumers don't want to buy that much. If the price is too low, there will be excess demand. Consumers would want more, but the producers wouldn't want to sell that much that the consumers are demanding. Markets naturally adjust to the equilibrium, ensuring the most efficient use of resources. A real life example in India would be the onion prices in India. During certain seasons, onion prices shoot up because of supply shortages, and at other times, because farmers face losses due to excess supply. The government sometimes intervenes to stabilize these prices, trying to achieve a sort of a market equilibrium. Okay. So in a perfectly efficient market, what happens? Consumers get goods they value at the right price. Producers are able to sell the goods at a price that covers their cost and earns them the profit. Total surplus is maximized. No more trades can make anyone else better off without making someone else worse off. Okay. Now, there are instances where the market also fails. Okay. Now, we'll talk about market failure. So, market efficiency is got when the resources are allocated efficiently. Assumptions how markets work. Markets are perfectly competitive. Outcome in a market matters only to the buyers and sellers in that market. When these assumptions do not hold, market equilibrium efficient may no longer be true. So, market failure occurs because of three reasons. Okay. Market failure occurs because of basically three reasons. One is externality, like pollution or public health benefits. Second is the market power, like monopolies. Third is information asymmetry. When one side of the market has more information than the other, then we get market inefficiencies. When these issues arise, the government intervenes to correct the inefficiency and restore the equilibrium. Okay. So market power, that is a single buyer or seller is controlling the market prices. Monopoly, markets are inefficient. Externalities, markets are inefficient. Okay. And information asymmetry, markets are inefficient. This is just a summary. So all in all, what have we seen? We have seen market failures occurring. We have seen that the invisible hand, the Adam Smith's idea, is that idea that markets, if left on their own, naturally move towards efficiency. A good Indian example would be the online platforms like Flipkart and Amazon. These platforms connect buyers and sellers efficiently, ensuring fair prices and wide product availability. Okay, which is obviously benefiting the entire economy. Okay, so market efficiency occurs when total surplus is maximized, goods are allocated to those who value them the most, and produced by those who can basically produce them the most efficiently. Equilibrium price ensures that the supply equals demand, preventing the shortages and surpluses. And market failures occur when external factors or market power disrupt this balance, requiring government intervention. Okay.